Nonviolence and Racial Justice by Martin Luther King, Jr. Published in the magazine Christian Century, February 6, 1957, Chicago, Illinois. Introduction. It is commonly observed that the crisis in race relations dominates American life. This crisis has been caused by two factors: the resistance of Southern whites against the Supreme Court's decision to end segregation in schools, and the change in the Negro's evaluation of himself. A revolutionary change has occurred in the Negro's understanding of his own nature and destiny. Once he thought of himself as an inferior and accepted injustice and exploitation. Those days are gone. Reading questions. What are the two factors that have created a crisis in race relations? What is the revolutionary change in paragraph 1? History of the Negro. The first Negroes came to this nation in 1619, 1 year before the Pilgrims. They were brought here from Africa, and, unlike the Pilgrims, they were brought as slaves. During slavery, the Negro was treated in inhuman fashion. He was a thing to be used, not a person to be respected. The famous Dred Scott decision of 1857 illustrates the Negro's status during slavery. In this decision, the Supreme Court of the United States said that the Negro is not a citizen of the United States. The court said that the Negro is property and must respect his owner. After emancipation, the end of slavery, in 1863, the Negro still confronted oppression and inequality. It is true that, for a time, during Reconstruction, the Negro had a short period of power. Then, in 1896, through the Plessy v. Ferguson decision, a new kind of slavery began. In this court case, the Supreme Court established the idea of separate but equal. Very soon, the resources would be separate but not equal. So the Negro fell into the abyss of exploitation where he experienced injustice. Living under these conditions, many Negroes lost faith. They felt that perhaps they were less than human. While the Negro accepted that he was inferior, there was racial peace. But it was an uneasy peace in which the Negro accepted insult, injustice, and exploitation. It was a negative peace. True peace is not the absence of some negative force, tension, confusion, or war. It is the presence of some positive force, justice, goodwill, and brotherhood. Number 1. What was the Plessy v. Ferguson case? Number 2. How does Dr. King describe the racial peace? Change in the Negro. Many factors caused the Negro to change, individually and as a group. He began to reevaluate himself, and so he felt that he was somebody. His religion revealed to him that God loves all his children, and that the important thing about a man is not the texture of his hair or the color of his skin, but the quality of his soul. This new self-respect and sense of dignity for the Negro undermined the negative peace. The white man refused to accept the change. The tension in race relations today is in part because of this revolutionary change in the Negro's evaluation of himself. Today, the Negro has the determination to struggle and sacrifice until justice crushes the walls of segregation. The struggle for freedom of the American Negro has developed slowly and is not going to end suddenly. When oppressed people rise up against oppression, the struggle will continue until freedom is a reality for all the oppressed people of the world. Number 1. According to the essay, why did the Negro change his opinion or evaluation about himself? Number 2. Why will the struggle for justice continue? How can we fight against injustice? Hence, the basic question which confronts the world's oppressed is, how will we fight against injustice? There are two possible answers. One is the all too prevalent method of physical violence and hatred. Violence solves no social problems. It creates new and more complicated ones. If the American Negro and other victims of oppression use violence in the struggle for justice, future generations will live in bitterness and their legacy will be endless chaos. The alternative to violence is nonviolent resistance. This method was made famous in our generation by Mohandas K. Gandhi. Gandhi used nonviolent resistance to free India from the British Empire. 5 points can be made about nonviolence as a method in bringing about better racial conditions. Number 1, what are the 2 ways to fight against injustice? Number 2, what did Mohandas K. Gandhi do? The 5 points of nonviolent resistance. First, this method is not for cowards. The nonviolent resistor is opposed to evil like the person who uses violence. He is not physically aggressive against his opponent, but his mind and his emotions are always active, constantly seeking to persuade the opponent that he is mistaken. A second point is that nonviolent resistance does not try to defeat or humiliate the opponent. The nonviolent resistor looks for understanding, although we may have to protest with boycotts. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of a community of love and peace. The aftermath of violence is bitterness. A third characteristic of this method is that the attack is against forces of evil and not against people. As I like to say to the people in Montgomery, Alabama, the tension in this city is not between white people and Negro people. The tension is between justice and injustice, between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And if there is a victory, it will be a victory not just for 50,000 Negroes, but a victory for justice and the forces of light. We are trying to defeat injustice and not white people who may happen to be unjust. A fourth point that must be brought out concerning nonviolent resistance is that it does not have violence of the body or the spirit. At the center of nonviolence there is the principle of love. Along the way of life, someone must have common sense and cut off the chain of hate. In speaking of love at this point, I am not referring to sentimental emotion. There are 3 words for love in the New Testament of the Bible. First, there is eros. Today, eros is of romantic love. Second, there is philia. It means love between friends. When we speak of loving those who oppress us, I do not refer to eros or philia, but to agape. Agape means understanding the goodwill for all men. It is the love of God working in the lives of men. When we love on the agape level, we love men not because we like them, but because God loves them. Finally, the method of nonviolence is based on the belief that the universe is on the side of justice. We believe that God is on the side of truth, and justice comes down to us from the long tradition of the Christian faith. So in Montgomery, we can walk and never get exhausted, because we know that there will be a great meeting in the promised land of freedom and justice. This, in brief, is the method of nonviolent resistance. I hope all who suffer oppression in this world reject the method of violence and choose the method that wants to redeem. By using this method wisely and courageously, we will emerge from the midnight of man's inhumanity to man into the bright daylight of freedom and justice. What are the 5 parts of nonviolent resistance? What is Dr. King's final hope in the last paragraph?